All right, ready to dive deep with us again. Today, we're going to unpack this really complex issue. It's the link between drug use and youth violence. We're going way beyond the headlines, like past all those Just Say No campaigns, and really trying to get into what the research says.
Yeah, and our source today is pretty intense.
Okay.
It's a report called Drugs, Youth Violence, Causes, Effects, and Solutions.
Mhm.
And it gives us like a global view, and I think you'll find some of what it says pretty surprising.
I'm ready to be surprised. So, let's set the stage, okay?
Okay.
Imagine you're sitting in on, a community task force meeting or your local school board.
Okay, yeah.
They're trying to figure out how to, tackle this whole problem of drugs and violence. What are the must-know things from this report that they need to know?
Well, first we got to get real about like how drugs affect young people, beyond just the legal stuff.
Yeah, okay.
This report highlights how even using drugs for a short time, especially things like synthetic cannabinoids, can cause memory problems, like long-term memory problems.
Wow.
Think about that, a teenager's brain, it's still developing, right?
Right.
And we're seeing damage that could like mess with their schoolwork, relationships, even their future jobs.
Wow, that's a lot bigger than just getting high on a weekend.
Right.
That's like talking about consequences that could last their whole lives.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties directly to the emotional and social fallout the report found.
Good.
Like aggression, depression, anxiety.
Mhm.
These aren't just like side effects, they're a part of the whole drug use problem. Imagine, a kid who's already dealing with family problems or having a hard time fitting in.
Yeah.
They turn to drugs to escape, but then the drugs actually make those problems even worse. It just like keeps going around and around.
So it's not just the drug itself, it's like their whole life. And this report really looks at why those two things, drugs and violence, become connected.
This is where it gets super interesting. Most people get that drugs can lower inhibitions, but this report goes deep into like the brain changes. Let's take stimulants like cocaine and meth.
Okay.
They flood the brain with dopamine, the feel-good chemical.
Right.
But they actually change how dopamine works in some important parts of the brain.
Wait, so are we talking about addiction or something else?
Well, kind of both. You see, dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's also about reward and motivation, like how our brains learn what's important to do. But when someone uses stimulants all the time, their brain becomes like less sensitive to rewards that are natural. It's like the drug kind of takes over their reward system.
So they need more and more of the drug to just feel normal.
Yeah, that's the addiction part.
Right.
But here's the other thing. The report found that these dopamine surges also affect the prefrontal cortex.
And what is that?
It's the part of the brain that controls impulse control and decision-making.
So they're more likely to just act without thinking, even if it could lead to violence.
Exactly. And then on top of that, stimulants can actually trigger aggression directly.
No.
They create this super alertness and paranoia. It's like their brain is stuck in, fight or flight mode, even when there's no real danger.
Now remember, this report wasn't just focused on the U.S., right? It talked about this happening globally.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It had case studies from the U.S. and Brazil to India, each with their own unique social and economic situations,
Right.
But here's the thing. The report showed that no matter where you are, there's this link. More youth drug use, more crime.
Okay, so that's pretty grim.
Yeah.
But this report doesn't just leave us there, does it? It talks about what we can do, right?
It does, but the biggest takeaway is that there's no quick fix. This report really emphasizes the need for what they call a multi-pronged approach. So for anyone, trying to come up with solutions, this is key.
Yeah.
Schools, law enforcement, and community groups, they've all got to work together. It's essential.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's dig into that. What are some of the specifics they recommend?
Well, there's this fascinating section about parental guidance programs. We're not talking about generic lectures.
Yeah.
These programs teach parents how to really communicate and how to see the early warning signs of drug use. Like really giving them tools to step in before things go off the rails.
So it's about being proactive, not just waiting for a crisis. That feels a lot more helpful.
Absolutely. It's about giving parents, the power to be active in their kids' lives, not just watching from the sidelines.
Right. And the report shows this actually works.
Yeah. And the results are pretty impressive. These programs, they've really been shown to cut down on teens even trying drugs in the first place.
Wow.
And they even improve family relationships overall.
That's huge. I mean, if we can stop kids from even experimenting with drugs, that's a major win.
Yeah.
But what about those kids who are already struggling? Like they're using drugs, maybe in trouble with the law.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for them?
Absolutely. The report spends a lot of time looking at alternative sentencing programs for young people who commit drug offenses.
Okay.
Instead of just locking them up, which often makes things worse, these programs focus on rehabilitation, on getting them back on track.
I'm thinking of something like drug courts. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's one example, but there are a lot of different approaches.
Yep.
Some programs involve a lot of therapy, others focus on job training or community service. The key is to provide support that's tailored to each person, help
Mm.
them build the skills they need to turn things around.
So give them a path forward, not just punishment.
Exactly.
Okay. And the report also talks about these community programs. What stood out to you there?
One of the coolest findings, I thought, was the impact of programs that focus on positive youth development.
Mm.
Things like sports, arts, music, even mentoring. The idea is to give kids healthy ways to use their energy and creativity, places where they can build confidence and feel like they belong.
So it's more than just keeping them busy. It's about giving them something to be passionate about, something that makes them feel good about themselves.
That's it. And the research actually backs this up. Kids in these programs are less likely to do risky things, like using drugs, and they do better in school and have stronger social connections.
It's almost like we're creating this positive cycle. They get into something they love, it builds their confidence, and then they're less likely to look for escapes like drugs.
Precisely. And it doesn't have to be just these organized programs. The report also talks about how important it is to have supportive environments in homes, schools, and communities.
Yeah, I can see that.
Young people need to feel safe, valued, and connected.
Right.
They need to know there are adults they can trust, adults who will listen without judging and help them through tough times.
So it's about how we treat young people overall, not just focusing on when they mess up, but making sure they have the support to thrive.
That's a great way to put it, and I think that's something we need to be shouting from the rooftops. We can't just keep reacting to problems. We need to be proactive, invest in our young people, and build communities where they can flourish.
Okay, so we've talked about parental guidance, alternative sentencing, community programs, and this overall need for support. But I keep thinking back to something you mentioned earlier about how media can sometimes glamorize drugs and violence. What did the report say about that?
Oh, that's a huge point, and it often gets overlooked. The report has a whole section on media's influence, and it's not just about movies and music anymore. Social media plays a big role these days.
Right, like how drugs are sometimes shown as cool or glamorous online.
Exactly. And sometimes it's subtle, like seeing influencers or celebrities partying with drugs or alcohol, or even just how certain lifestyles are portrayed. It makes it seem normal, like, everybody's doing it, so it must be okay.
Which is especially dangerous for kids and teens, right? They're already trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in.
Absolutely. They're constantly seeing these images and messages, and it can be tough to separate reality from fantasy. They might see their favorite rapper flashing cash and think selling drugs is a quick way to get rich without realizing the dangers and consequences.
So it's not about censoring things. It's about teaching young people to think critically about what they see in the media.
Right. It's about media literacy, helping them analyze what they're seeing, question the messages behind the images, and make their own smart choices about what they consume.
That seems like a crucial skill for life in general, not just for navigating drugs and violence. We're all surrounded by information and images all the time.
It's true, and it'll only become more important as technology keeps changing. The report even suggests teaching media literacy in schools, starting young.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just saying, don't watch that, we teach them how to watch it critically and understand what's really going on.
Exactly. It's about giving them the power to be active participants in the media world, not just passive viewers.
Okay, so we've got this whole mix of things going on. The effects of drugs on the brain, social pressures, the way risky behavior is shown in media. It feels like a big, tangled mess. But this report doesn't leave us feeling totally hopeless, does it?
No, not at all. In fact, one of the most encouraging things is how much it focuses on prevention. It's not just about reacting to problems after they happen. It's about setting things up so young people are less likely to get involved with drugs and violence in the first place.
So it's a whole different approach, shifting from punishment to actually preventing these things from happening.
Exactly. And it starts with understanding the things that put young people at risk and the things that can protect them.
Like risk factors, you mean things like poverty, trauma, or seeing violence. And protective factors like strong families, good friends, and having opportunities.
You got it. And the report highlights that even though we can't always control the risks kids face, we can definitely work on building up those protective factors.
So it's about building resilience.
That's the key. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from tough stuff, to overcome challenges and thrive even when things are hard. And the report is clear. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you can build.
And we can help young people build that resilience by giving them the support, resources, and opportunities they need to be successful.
Absolutely. And it's not just about giving them things, it's about creating an environment where they feel seen, heard, and valued. It's about helping them feel like they belong and that their lives have meaning.
It sounds like we're talking about a much bigger change in how we see and treat young people. It's not just about focusing on their mistakes, but about creating conditions where they can thrive.
That's a powerful way to say it. And I think it's a message we need to keep repeating. We can't just keep responding to crises. We need to be proactive. We need to invest in our young people, and we need to build communities that support them. And that's what makes this report, so helpful. It doesn't just say do more. It actually gives us like specific things to do.
Yeah.
For example, there's this really interesting part about parental guidance programs.
Hmm.
And we're not talking about those, generic lectures.
Right.
These programs focus on teaching parents how to, really talk to their kids and how to spot those early signs of drug use.
So like giving parents the tools to actually step in before it becomes a huge problem,
Yeah.
that feels a lot more useful than just like waiting for something bad to happen.
Right. It's about giving parents the power to, really be a part of their kids' lives, not just watching from a distance.
Yeah, I see that. And this report, it shows that this actually makes a difference, right?
Yeah, the results are pretty amazing. These programs, they've been shown to significantly reduce, teens even trying drugs in the first place.
Wow, that's huge. I mean, if we can keep kids from even experimenting with drugs, that's a major win. But what about, the kids who are already saggling? Like they're already using drugs, maybe they're even in trouble with the law.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for them?
Absolutely. The report spends a good chunk of time looking at alternative sentencing programs for youth who have committed drug offenses.
Okay.
So instead of just sending them to jail, which can often backfire and make things worse, these programs really focus on rehabilitation and helping them reintegrate back into society.
So I'm thinking of things like drug courts. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, drug courts are one example, but there are many different models out there.
Okay.
Some programs involve like intensive therapy, while others might focus more on vocational training or community service. The key is to give support that's really individualized, tailored to each person, and help them learn the skills they need to turn their lives around.
That makes sense. Give them a path forward, not just punishment. Okay, and the report also talks about the role of community programs, right?
Right.
What were some of the things that stood out to you there?
Well, one of the most interesting things I thought was how effective those positive youth development programs can be. Things like sports, the arts, music, even mentorship programs. The idea is to give kids healthy ways to express themselves and use their energy, places where they can build their self-esteem and feel like they belong.
So it's not just about, keeping them busy. It's about giving them something to be passionate about, something that gives them a sense of purpose.
Exactly. And the research supports this. Kids who are involved in these kinds of programs, they're less likely to engage in risky behaviors, including drug use. And they tend to do better in school and have stronger social connections.
It's like creating this positive feedback loop, right? They get involved in something they love, it helps them feel more confident, and then they're less likely to need those negative escapes, like drugs.
Precisely. And it's not just about structured programs either. The report also really highlights how important it is to create supportive environments, like in their homes, schools, and communities.
Right, I can see how that's important.
Young people need to feel safe, valued, and connected. They need to know that there are adults in their lives that they can trust, adults who will listen to them without judging and who can guide them through tough times.
It sounds like we're talking about a much bigger change in how we see and treat young people. It's not just about focusing on their mistakes, but about creating conditions where they can actually thrive.
That's a great way to put it, and I think that's a message we need to be shouting from the rooftops. We can't just keep reacting to problems. We need to be proactive, invest in our young people, and build communities that support them.
Okay, so we've talked about parental guidance programs, alternative sentencing, community programs, and this overall need for support. But I keep thinking back to something you mentioned before about how media can sometimes glamorize drugs and violence. What did the report have to say about that?
Oh, that's such a crucial point, and it's something that often gets overlooked. The report dedicates a whole section to the influence of media, and it's not just about traditional media like movies and music anymore. Social media plays a huge role these days.
Right, you mean like how drugs are sometimes portrayed as cool or glamorous on social media?
Exactly. And sometimes it's more subtle, like seeing influencers or celebrities partying with drugs and alcohol, or even just the way certain lifestyles are portrayed online. It can create this sense of normalization, this idea that everybody's doing it, so it must be okay.
Which is especially risky for young people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're already trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in.
Absolutely. They're bombarded with all these images and messages, and it can be really hard to separate what's real from what's fantasy. They might see their favorite rapper flashing cash and think selling drugs is a quick and easy path to success without understanding the risks and the consequences.
So it's not about censoring things. It's about teaching young people how to be critical consumers of media.
Exactly. It's all about media literacy, helping them to analyze what they're seeing, question the messages behind the images, and make informed choices about what they choose to consume.
That feels like such an important life skill these days, not just for understanding drugs and violence, but for navigating the world in general. We're all surrounded by information and images all the time.
That's so true. And it's only going to get more important as technology continues to evolve. The report actually suggests incorporating media literacy into school curriculums, starting at a young age.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just saying, don't watch that, we're actually teaching them how to watch it critically and understand what's really going on.
Precisely. It's about empowering them to be active participants in the media landscape, not just passive consumers.
Okay, so we've got this really complex mix of influences at play. The way drugs affect the brain, social pressures, the way risky behaviors are portrayed in the media. It can feel overwhelming, like trying to untangle a giant knot, but the report doesn't leave us feeling totally hopeless.
Oh,
Right.
not at all. In fact, one of the most encouraging things about the report is its focus on prevention. It's not just about reacting to problems after they happen. It's about creating the kind of conditions that make it less likely for young people to get involved with drugs and violence in the first place.
So we're talking about a fundamental shift in our approach, moving away from just punishment and towards preventing these things from happening in the first place.
Exactly. And that starts with understanding the risk factors, the things that increase the likelihood of problems, and the protective factors, the things that can help shield young people.
Right, so risk factors would be things like poverty, trauma, or exposure to violence. And protective factors would be things like strong family relationships, positive peer groups, and access to opportunities.
You got it. And the report highlights that while we can't always control the risk factors a young person faces, we can work to strengthen those protective factors.
So it's about building resilience.
That's the key word. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity, to overcome challenges and thrive even in difficult circumstances. And the report makes it clear, resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you can develop.
And we can help young people develop that resilience by giving them the support, the resources, and the opportunities they need to succeed.
Absolutely. And it's not just about providing them with things, it's about creating environments where young people feel seen, heard, and valued. It's about fostering a sense of belonging and purpose.
It sounds like we're talking about a pretty big shift in how we see and support young people. Not just focusing on what they're doing wrong, but really creating the conditions for them to thrive.
That's a powerful way to put it. And I think it's a message we need to be shouting from the rooftops. We can't just keep reacting to problems. We need to be proactive. We need to invest in our young people, and we need to create communities where they can flourish.
As we've been talking, it just really hits me how much of this is about changing our whole perspective. It's not just about stopping drugs and violence directly.
Yeah.
It's about addressing those underlying social and emotional needs that young people have.
I totally agree. It's about moving past just the symptoms and really getting at the root causes,
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of a multi-pronged approach that the report talks about is so important. We can't just focus on one thing. We need to be looking at this from all sides: prevention, education, law enforcement, mental health, rehab, and making sure all those efforts actually fit the needs of each community.
So there's no one solution that's going to work everywhere. It's about taking this broader view and recognizing that this isn't just a problem for, those kids over there, but it's something that affects all of us.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that, everybody has a role to play in this, no matter how big or small. Whether it's having conversations with your own kids, volunteering at a local youth organization, or pushing for better resources in your community, every little bit counts.
It's about turning that awareness into actual action. So let's say someone's listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to do something, but where do I even begin?
Mm.
What would you suggest?
That's a great question. Um, I think step one is to really look at what's happening in your own community.
Yeah.
What are the specific challenges that young people in your area are facing? Are there enough prevention programs? Are mental health resources easy to get to? Are there opportunities to support kids who are at risk through mentoring or after-school programs? That kind of thing.
So it's about becoming more informed, being a more engaged citizen, not just relying on the news or social media to tell you what's happening, but really going out there and talking to people, attending community meetings, doing your own research.
That's exactly right. And once you have a better grasp of what's going on locally, then you can start to pinpoint those areas where you can really make a difference. Maybe you volunteer at a youth center. Maybe you donate to an organization working on the front lines. Maybe you start talking to your school board about starting a new prevention program. There are a lot of options.
It's about taking that feeling of something needs to change and turning it into something real, something you actually do.
Yeah, and remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and it takes, consistent effort. But everything you do, even the small things, contribute to the bigger picture.
It's about planting those seeds of hope and then nurturing them with compassion, understanding, and a commitment to creating a better future for young people.
That's beautifully said. And I think that's the message we want to leave our listeners with today. This is a complicated issue, it's a tough one, but it's not impossible to overcome. We can make a difference, we can change things, but it starts with each of us taking that first step.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've really gone deep, explored some tough realities, but we've also found those sparks of hope. Are there any resources that our listeners can check out if they want to, learn more about this topic or get involved in their own communities?
Oh, absolutely. We've put together a list of organizations, websites, even some books and articles in the show notes. There's so much information out there, and we encourage everyone to take some time to look through it all, find what speaks to you, and then think about how you can turn that knowledge into action.
Because in the end, this fight against drug abuse and youth violence, it's really a fight for the well-being of our communities, our future, and our shared humanity.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for being with us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep working to make a difference.